3 years after my wife passed away, I came to accept that a part of me had died with her. All I had left were my military uniform, my memories, and a $250,000 life insurance account that I swore I would never touch. Then Isabella Rossi appeared. She was beautiful, clever, and seemed to understand me better than anyone. She painted a perfect future for me, one secured by her mother's $500 million fortune. I gave her my trust, my heart, and access to that account, but behind the smiles and sweet words, she had already decided the day she would abandon me, as soon as her mother passed away, to claim that inheritance for herself. She thought she was playing a perfect game. What she didn't know was that the entire fortune was a lie, and I knew the truth long before she did. To understand how I fell into that situation, you have to understand how heavy the silence is in a soldier's room at Fort Bragg. I'm Jacob Williams, 42 years old, a major in the 82nd Airborne Division. In the Army, everything is clear: orders, ranks, missions. But when the door to my room closed, all that was left was the silence of a man. On my desk, a photo of my wife, Sarah, was always there. 3 years had passed, and the emptiness remained. The $250,000 insurance money sat untouched in the account. To me, it wasn't an asset. It was a responsibility. The last part of her I had to protect. The noise of the training ground helped me forget. But the quiet of the night brought everything back. My friends in the unit tried to help, saying, "Dwelling on the past won't do you any good, Jake." I eventually listened. A vacation was coming, and I needed a change, a place without memories. Scottsdale, Arizona, was chosen simply because it was far away and sunny. I arrived without a specific plan, intending to find a quiet bar and forget the world. Then I ran into an old friend, Mark, who was a real estate agent and, of course, wouldn't leave me alone. He called, his voice full of excitement. "I'm hosting a charity gala tonight with a bunch of VIPs. You have to come, Jake. It'll be a change of pace." I wasn't interested in VIPs, but out of respect for Mark, I agreed. What harm could one night do? And that's where I met Isabella Rossi. A woman with sharp beauty and a confidence that made everything around her seem to revolve around her will. In a party where people turned conversations into personal achievements, she found me, the out-of-place soldier standing in a corner. "I haven't seen you here before," she said, her voice smooth as velvet. "I'm just passing through," I replied. Most people would have stopped there, but Isabella didn't. She asked about my work and life in the military. And she truly listened, or at least, she created the perfect illusion that she cared. Then she gently placed her hand on my arm, a small but purposeful gesture. "A strong man like you needs a place to come home to, doesn't he?" she asked. That line struck my weakest point. It wasn't a question. It was a key, unlocking a door I had tried to keep shut for so long. For the first time in years, I felt like someone saw through my disciplined facade and touched the weariness inside. Looking back now, I know it was just a tactic. She had identified her target and fired perfectly. But at that moment, Isabella was a promise of a home, a cure for something I hadn't even dared to admit I needed. And I, a soldier, used to making split-second decisions on the battlefield, made a tactical error in real life. I walked straight into that sweet trap without hesitation. The rest of my vacation in Scottsdale passed in a blur. We rushed into the relationship, with late-night dinners, long conversations, and walks under the desert sky. Isabella was an expert. She knew when to listen, when to share a seemingly vulnerable story, and when to simply be silent and let her presence fill the void. When I returned to Fort Bragg, the distance seemed to strengthen our bond, or so I thought. Daily calls and texts maintained the illusion perfectly. She never made demands, but always made me feel like the center of her world. One time, while talking about the future, she skillfully probed, "It's wonderful that you're a planner, Jake. That savings account. It shows you're a responsible man who cares for his family." At the time, I heard it as a compliment. Now, I know it was reconnaissance. My friend Mark was a bit suspicious. "It's moving too fast, Jake," he said over the phone. "You don't even know that much about her." "I know what I need to know," I replied, dismissing his warning. A soldier learns to trust his instincts, and mine, dulled by loneliness, were screaming that this was my second chance. On my next vacation, 3 months later, I was completely convinced. One evening, after a meal at a fancy restaurant, overlooking the distant mountains, the feeling came over me. The feeling that this was it, the missing piece. In the military, we are taught to act decisively when the time is right. And I acted. I proposed right there. Isabella seemed surprised, but her eyes held a gleam I mistook for happiness. She nodded, and in that moment, I felt like I had conquered the world. After the initial excitement subsided, as we were driving back, she delivered the final blow. She took my hand, her voice suddenly gentle but serious. "Jake, there's something I have to tell you. My mother, Eleanor, her health isn't good, and I'm the only one who takes care of her. I'm living with her. I hope that's not a big problem." She said it as if it were a small burden, a minor inconvenience. But that's not how I heard it. A soldier is taught to respect loyalty, and what I saw in Isabella at that moment was filial piety, devotion. Instead of being a red flag, it reinforced my decision. "Of course not, Bella," I said firmly. "I respect that. Taking care of family is the most important thing." She smiled a satisfied smile. The trap had closed perfectly, and I, a seasoned soldier, had walked right into it, even feeling proud of my decision. We got married in a small ceremony. Afterward, my life fell into a new rhythm. Months of intense duty at Fort Bragg, and precious vacations in Scottsdale. In the house I now called home, the house of Isabella's mother, Eleanor Vance, was not just big. It had a quiet strength, an unpretentious elegance. Everything was intentionally placed, from the hardcover books on the shelves to the subtle art on the walls. It perfectly reflected its owner. When I first met Eleanor, I expected an awkward social exchange. I was wrong. She had the eyes of a general, sharp and all-seeing. She didn't ask me meaningless questions. Instead, she asked about strategy and the role of a leader in the military. We had a real conversation, and I immediately felt a deep respect for her. She was a woman built from the core, not the surface. Isabella played the part of a devoted daughter and a dutiful wife perfectly. She always talked about how busy she was caring for her mother and the house. "I'm exhausted today," she would often say when I returned. "Taking care of Mom, then cleaning, cooking." But an officer's instinct is to observe. I started to notice things that didn't add up. The house was always clean, but that was thanks to a cleaning service that came 3 times a week. Dinner was usually takeout from expensive restaurants. Even though Isabella said she had spent all afternoon in the kitchen, I noticed Eleanor mostly took care of herself or relied on a private nurse who came in the mornings. The first real crack appeared one afternoon. Eleanor and I were sitting on the back patio, discussing a biography of General Patton we had both read. The conversation was deep, about honor and difficult decisions. Just then, Isabella came out, holding her phone. She interrupted us without hesitation. "Oh my God, you guys won't believe this," she said, her voice dramatic. That reality television star just broke up with her boyfriend. What a tragedy. The contrast was stark. We were talking about battles that shaped history, and she was concerned with cheap television drama. Eleanor just quietly sipped her tea, not saying a word, but I saw the disappointment flash in her eyes. I tried to make excuses for Isabella, telling myself she was just trying to lighten the mood, that I was being too serious. I ignored it, filing it under minor differences. But a soldier knows that small cracks, if ignored, can bring down a solid structure, and the foundation of the marriage I was trying to build was clearly not as strong as I had thought. Before I was deployed for a 6-week training exercise, I gave Isabella a supplementary credit card linked to my savings account. Use it for household necessities. Or if there's an emergency, I said. It was a logical decision. A fatal mistake. In the 4th week of training, my phone buzzed with a notification from the bank. Not a text message. A transaction alert. A payment of $55,000 to a luxury car dealership in Scottsdale. I stared at the number. $55,000. That wasn't an emergency. It was an attack on the money I had preserved as a promise. I didn't call her. In the military, you don't act when your emotions are running hot. You gather information, assess the situation, and plan. I waited. 2 weeks later, when I returned to Scottsdale, a brand new pearl white SUV was parked in the driveway, sparkling in the Arizona sun. I went straight into the house, dropped my bag, and found Isabella. She was by the pool, reading a fashion magazine. I didn't beat around the bush. I placed the bank statement I had printed out on the small table next to her. "Explain this," I said, my voice emotionless. She glanced at the paper, then at me, without a hint of confusion. "Oh, that?" My old car kept breaking down. We needed a more reliable one. "We?" I asked, emphasizing the word. "That car costs more than my annual salary, and it was paid for with my money, Bella. My savings." At this, her smile faded. She stood up, crossing her arms. "Jake, don't be so dramatic. It's just a car." "No," I said, my voice turning cold. "It's a lack of respect. You spent 1/5 of that money without even consulting me." This was when the mask truly fell. The gentleness vanished, replaced by a condescending, almost pitying look. She sighed as if explaining the obvious to a child. "Sweetie, don't worry about these little things," she said, her tone patronizing. "Do you know who my mother is? Her assets are worth $500 million. It will all be ours someday. Just consider this a small advance to enjoy life." $500 million. The number hung in the air between us. It didn't sound like an explanation. It sounded like a threat, a naked boast. It said my money was nothing, that my sacrifice was meaningless. A cold feeling spread through my chest. I looked at her, and for the first time, I didn't see the woman I had loved and married. I saw a complete stranger, someone with values I couldn't comprehend. I didn't argue further. I just nodded slowly. The battle ahead couldn't be won with a direct confrontation. It needed a different strategy. And right then, in the silence by the pool, I started to plan. I didn't bring up the car again. Instead, I observed. I listened. I treated Isabella with a cool politeness she either didn't notice or deliberately ignored. To her, everything was settled. She had gotten what she wanted. But Eleanor noticed. A few days after the confrontation by the pool, she called me into her study, a quiet room with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves. She motioned for me to sit down, her sharp eyes looking directly at me. "I see a change," she said, her voice calm but commanding. "What has Isabella done, Jake? A soldier is taught to be loyal. But my loyalty to Isabella had shattered. Instead, I felt a strange connection to the woman sitting in front of me. I told her everything. About the car, Isabella's explanation, and the $500 million figure. Eleanor listened, her face expressionless. When I finished, she just nodded, a weary nod. "I'm sorry, Jake, I had hoped, but she's always been like this." She looked out the window, her gaze distant. "She has her father's greed, but none of his intelligence." It was the first time I had heard her mention her husband. A week later, as my leave was about to end, Eleanor called me into her study again. This time, there was another person with her. An elderly man in a formal suit, whom she introduced as David Chen, her private lawyer for 30 years. The atmosphere in the room was heavy. Eleanor looked weaker, but her eyes still held a cold determination. Jake, she began, there are some things you need to know. Because you're family now. And because I don't trust anyone else. David Chen opened a leather briefcase, took out a thick stack of documents, and pushed it toward me. Major Williams, he said. This is a summary of Mrs. Vance's current financial situation. I started reading. The numbers, legal terms, contracts. At first I didn't understand, but then the picture slowly emerged, and it wasn't a pretty one. It was a ruin. $500 million. The number was real, but it wasn't cash. It was the estimated value of her entire real estate portfolio. Office buildings, commercial centers, and nearly all of them had been used as collateral for a huge loan. Eleanor had invested the entire borrowed amount into a passion project, an affordable housing complex and community center in a struggling part of Phoenix. A charitable project, a legacy she wanted to leave behind. But the market collapsed. The project failed. The debt remained massive and unpayable. The bank had given her a grace period, but that time was almost up. So, I looked up at them, the cold feeling returning. It will all be lost. David Chen nodded. The bank will liquidate all assets to recover the debt. What's left, after all expenses, will be negligible. I looked at Eleanor. She didn't avoid my gaze. Isabella knows nothing about this, she said. Her voice now almost a whisper. She only sees the buildings. She only hears about the 500 million. She never asked about the debts, about the risks. I don't believe she can handle the truth. She took a deep breath. I don't have much time, Jake. I know that. I don't trust anyone but you. I need you to promise me. You'll do the right thing when it's all over. In that moment, everything changed. This was no longer my own fight. It had become a mission. A duty entrusted to me by a general preparing for her final battle. I promise, I said. And it wasn't just a promise. It was a vow. Eleanor's health declined rapidly after that. My leave ended, and I had to return to Fort Bragg with a burden no one in my unit could understand. I received daily calls not from Isabella but from Eleanor's nurse. The calls grew shorter. 3 months later, the call I had been preparing for finally came. Eleanor Vance had passed away peacefully in her sleep. I immediately requested emergency leave and flew back to Scottsdale. The house now held a different kind of silence. A cold emptiness. Isabella wore black, seemingly grief-stricken, but I could see the poorly disguised excitement in her every move. She was busy planning a grand funeral, more of a social event than a farewell. I did what had to be done. I handled the procedures Isabella ignored. I received Eleanor's old friends, the ones who had truly come to mourn. I stood there, a soldier in a black suit, quietly fulfilling my final duty for the commander I respected. The funeral was exactly what Isabella wanted, extravagant and theatrical. She read a tearful eulogy that was clearly professionally written. I said nothing. My silence was the only respect I could offer Eleanor. That very evening, after the last guests had left, and the house fell silent again, Isabella found me. She had dropped the facade of grief. Her face was radiant, her eyes gleaming with something stronger than pain. It's finally over, she said with a sense of relief. I just nodded. She came closer, holding a stack of prepared papers. Jake, we need to talk. I think this is the best time for both of us to start over. She placed the papers on the table. They were divorce papers. Your job is done, she said, her voice emotionless, cold, and practical. Now with $500 million, I don't need you anymore. Thanks for being a temporary wallet. I looked at her, at the eyes of the woman I had once thought I would spend the rest of my life with. There was no anger, no heartbreak, only a chilling clarity. This was her true self. This was her final objective. I didn't say a word. I picked up the pen on the table. Isabella smiled, the smile of a victor. I quietly signed the papers, my signature clear and decisive, just as I would sign a mission report. "I'll pack my things," I said, my voice completely calm. My composure seemed to baffle her. She had expected a fight, begging, some drama, but I didn't give her that satisfaction. I went upstairs and packed a few personal items into my duffel bag. It took only 10 minutes. When I came back down, Isabella was standing in the hall, arms crossed, her expression both triumphant and a little confused. I walked past her, heading straight for the door. "Is that it?" she called after me, her voice a little frustrated. I stopped at the threshold but didn't turn around. "That's it," I said, and I walked out, leaving her alone in the empty house with her illusory victory. Her battle might have ended, but mine was just beginning. I didn't return to Fort Bragg immediately. Instead, I rented a simple hotel room on the outskirts of Phoenix and waited. I knew the process. Eleanor's lawyer, Mr. Chen, had explained it in detail. The execution of the will and the settlement of the debts with the bank would take about a week for reality to hit. I used the time to plan my future, one without Isabella. The feeling wasn't one of heartbreak, but of immense relief, as if a huge weight had been lifted. Exactly 7 days later, my phone rang. It was an unfamiliar number, but I knew who it was. I let it ring a few more times before answering. "Hello," I said, my voice calm. "Jake!" Isabella's shriek was deafening, filled with panic. "What did you do? What did you do with the money?" I held the phone away from my ear. "I don't know what you're talking about, Isabella. Don't pretend," she screamed, her voice breaking with rage and fear. "The bank! They've sealed everything. They told me I have to leave the house. Where's the money? What does the will say? You colluded with that old lawyer to steal everything from me, didn't you?" I stayed silent, letting her hysteria subside. When she finally ran out of breath and started sobbing, I spoke, my voice even, and emotionless, as if reading a report. "There is no $500 million, Isabella. It was never cash. You're lying. It was the value of the real estate portfolio," I continued, ignoring her accusation, "and that entire portfolio was used by your mother as collateral for a loan. A loan she couldn't repay." A sudden silence on the other end. I could hear her gasping. "A loan?" she stammered. "For a community project. The project failed. The bank is liquidating everything to recover the debt. The house, the cars, everything. That's what your mother tried to tell you, but you never bothered to listen." The silence stretched on. I could picture her, face pale, her world of illusion crumbling around her. "So, what's left?" Her voice was a faint, pathetic whisper. "According to Mr. Chen," I replied matter-of-factly, "after all debts and legal fees are subtracted, there is a small account left. Eleanor's will states, that's your true inheritance." "How much?" she asked, her voice filled with desperate hope. I paused for a moment before delivering the final blow. $50,000. A choked sob came through the phone, the sound of someone who had lost everything, but I can't live on that," she wailed. "Jake, I have nothing left. You have to help me. We're still married. Can we get back together? Jake, please." "No," I said, my voice still unwavering. "Our story is over, Isabella. You made that very clear." I hung up, cutting off her pleas. I placed the phone on the table, looking out the hotel window. The Arizona sun was still shining. The world kept turning. The mission was complete. Justice, in a way, had been served. And for the first time, in a long time, I felt truly free. Eleanor's will had one final clause. She had left half of the remaining money after liquidation to me, $25,000, as a thank you. At first I was going to refuse, but then I reconsidered. It wasn't Isabella's money. It was Eleanor's final acknowledgement. I accepted it, not for myself. The very next day, I worked with lawyer Chen to set up a small scholarship fund at a community college in Scottsdale, named the Eleanor Vance Fund. A small legacy, but a genuine one. It was the right thing to do. I returned to Fort Bragg, back to the life I belonged to. The wound was still there, but it was no longer a dull ache. It was a lesson. A scar reminding me of a battle I had to fight and won. I no longer felt hopelessly alone. I found strength in discipline, in camaraderie, and in my own mission. Months passed. Life returned to normal. One Saturday afternoon, I was sitting in a small cafe outside the base, reading a book. It was a simple place where soldiers like me could find some peace. The door opened, and a familiar figure walked in. It was Isabella. She looked completely different. Her hair was in a messy bun. Her clothes were clean, but cheap and worn. The confidence and arrogance were gone, replaced by a deep weariness etched on her face. She was wearing the cafe's uniform. She saw me and froze. I just gave a polite nod, then returned to my book, giving her an out, a chance to ignore me. But she didn't. After taking an order from another customer, she hesitated and then walked over to my table. "Jake," she began, her voice trembling. I know I was wrong. I've lost everything." I remained silent, waiting. Tears welled up in her eyes. I remember our first days. I was genuinely happy. "Please, give me another chance. I'll do anything. I've really changed." I folded my book and placed it on the table. I looked at her, not with hate or pity, but with a strange tranquility. I looked at her as if she were a complete stranger. "I see you've changed, Isabella," I said, my voice devoid of emotion. "Life has taught you a lesson." I stood up, placing a few dollars on the table for my coffee. Before turning away, I said my final words. A definitive closure. But our story is over. My mission with you, and with your mother, is complete. Good luck. I turned and walked away, decisive and without a single glance back. I walked out of the cafe, toward the sun, toward my new life, leaving Isabella alone with her stained apron, her past, and her belated regrets.